I'm Margaret Brennan in Washington, and this week on Face the Nation, as the turmoil over tariffs continues, we'll speak exclusively with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. The economic whiplash from the on-again, off-again Trump tariffs persists here at home, as does the confusion around the world. As for President Trump, he's doubling down on his insistence that they'll help the U.S. economy.
And it'll only get better. The tariffs are so important. Without the tariffs, our nation would be imperiled.
We'll talk with Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul about what he doesn't like in the president's big, beautiful bill. Plus, how will the administration's new restrictions on foreign student visas impact America's colleges and universities? House Democrat Raja Krishnamurthy and Wesleyan University President Michael Roth will be here. Finally, we'll get some clarity on whether or not healthy children and pregnant women should get the COVID vaccine after a week of mixed messaging from Trump administration health officials. FDA Commissioner Dr. Marty Makary will join us to clear things up. It's all just ahead on Face the Nation. Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We begin today with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Good morning and thank you for being here.
Morning, Margaret.
There's so much to get to. I want to start with China because the defense secretary just said there's an imminent military threat from China to Taiwan. Days earlier, Secretary Rubio said he'd aggressively revoked Chinese student visas. On top of that, you have curbing exports to China. Trade talks, you said, with Beijing are stalled, and President Trump just accused China of violating an agreement and now says no more Mr. Nice Guy. Are you intentionally escalating this standoff with Beijing?
Well, I don't think it's intentional. I think that what Secretary Hegseth did was remind everyone that during COVID, China was an unreliable partner. And what we are trying to do is to de-risk. We do not want to decouple, Margaret, but we do need to de-risk, as we saw during COVID, whether it was with semiconductors, medicines, the other products. We are in the process of de-risking.
Making the United States less reliant on China, but at the same time.
And the whole world. The whole world, because what China is doing is they are holding back products that are essential for the industrial supply chains of India, of Europe, and that is not what a reliable partner does.
So is that, like, what specifically is President Trump saying when he says they're violating an agreement? Because it was the one you negotiated in Geneva earlier this month. And what's the consequence for that?
Well, we will see what the consequences are. I am confident that when President Trump and Party Chairman Xi have a call, that this will be ironed out. So, but the fact that they are withholding some of the products that they agreed to release during our agreement, maybe it's a glitch in the Chinese system. Maybe it's intentional. We'll see after the president speaks with the party chairman. That's
critical minerals, rare earths. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
So the president has said a few times that he was going to speak to President Xi, but he hasn't since before the inauguration. Beijing keeps denying that there was any contact. Do you have anything scheduled?
I believe we'll see something very soon, Margaret.
Do you have a conversation with your counterpart or Lutnick with his counterpart at the commerce level?
Well, I think we're going to let the two principals have a conversation, and then everything will stem from that.
JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon spoke this week at an economic forum, and he gave this read on Beijing.
I just got back from China last week. They're not scared, folks. This notion they're going to come bow to America, I wouldn't count on that. And when they have a problem, they put 100,000 engineers on it, and they've been preparing for this for years.
Have you underestimated the Chinese state's backbone here?
Again, Margaret, I hope it doesn't come to that. And Jamie's a great banker. I know him well, but I would vociferously disagree with that assessment that the laws of economics and gravity apply to the Chinese economy and the Chinese system, just like everyone else.
But when you were last here in March, we were trying to gauge what the impact of the standoff with China and with the tariffs on the rest of the world would do for American consumers here at home. At that time, you told us you were going to appoint an affordability czar and council to figure out 5, you said, or 8 areas where there will be some, pain for working class Americans. Where are you anticipating price increases?
Well, thus far, we wanted to make sure that there aren't price increases, Margaret, and thus far there have been no price increases. Everything has been alarmist, that the inflation numbers are actually dropping. We saw the first drop of inflation in 4 years. The inflation numbers last week, they were very pro-consumer.
Right. But you listen to earnings calls just like we do. You know what Walmart's saying, what Best Buy's saying, and what Target are saying.
But Margaret, I also know what Home Depot and Amazon are saying. I know what the South China Morning Post wrote within the past 24 hours, that 65% of the tariffs will likely be eaten by the Chinese producers.
So are there 5 or 8 areas that you have identified, as you said back in March, where American consumers will be able to have lower prices or should be warned of higher prices?
Well, a lot of it's already working its way through the system. So we've seen a substantial decrease in gasoline and energy prices. So that's down 20% year over year. We've seen the food prices go down, these notorious egg prices. Through the good work of President Trump and Secretary Rollins, egg prices have collapsed. So we're seeing more and more. And what we want to do is even that out across all sections of the economy. So inflation has been very tame. Consumer earnings were up 0.8% last month, which is a gigantic increase for 1 month. So real earnings minus low inflation is great for the American people, and that's what we're seeing.
But because when you met with the Chinese earlier this month, and you went down from the 145% tariff down to about, it's like 30%. 30% is not nothing, that tax on goods coming in here. Retailers are warning of price hikes. Well, when you go back to school shopping, things are going to cost more.
But Margaret, some are and some aren't. Home Depot and Amazon said they're not. And
Home Depot and Amazon aren't where you go for your back-to-school shopping. When you buy your jeans, when you buy your crayons, when you buy all those things that parents are going to be
I don't know about you, but I do it online at Amazon. This isn't an advertisement for Amazon. And guess where most of the Halloween costumes in America get bought? At Home Depot. So that's just not right. There's a wide aperture here. Different companies are doing different things. They are making decisions based on their customers, what they think they're able to pass along to their customers, what they want to do to keep their customers. And I was in the investment business for 35 years, Margaret, and I will tell you, earnings calls, they have to give the worst case scenario, because if they haven't and something bad happens, then they'll be sued.
It's not always the worst case. It's the most probable case.
No. They have to give the worst case.
So Walmart, there was just a piece published with the conservative strategist Karl Rove. I'm not asking about politics because he is a political strategist, but he went in on the math here. And he points out that Walmart has a profit margin of less than 3%. He says, if it does what Mr. Trump says, eat the tariffs, it can't break even. It can't absorb the cost of imported pair of kids' jeans with a 46% tariff on Vietnam, a 37% tariff for Bangladesh, or 32% tariff on sneakers from Indonesia. Other companies are in the same pickle. So should companies cut back on the amount of goods they have on their shelves or just on their profitability?
That's a decision company by company, Margaret. And I had a long discussion with Doug McMillon, the CEO of Walmart, and they're going to do what's right for them.
Before consumers, the reality is there will either be less inventory or things at higher prices or both.
Margaret, when we were here in March, you said there was going to be big inflation. There hasn't been any inflation. Actually, the inflation numbers are the best in 4 years. So why don't we stop trying to say this could happen and wait and see what does happen?
Just trying to gauge for people planning ahead here. One of the things the president said on Friday is that he's going to double the tariffs on steel and aluminum up to 50% effective June the 4th. How much will that impact the construction industry?
Well, I think I was with the president at the U.S. Steel plant in Pittsburgh on Friday, and I will tell you that the president has the reignited the steel industry here in America. And back to the earlier statements on national security, there are national security priorities here for having a strong steel industry.
But do you have a prediction on how much it's going to impact the construction industry, for example?
Well, I have a prediction on how much it's going to impact the steel industry, and we'll see. There are a lot of elasticities that this is a very complicated ecosystem. So, is it going to impact the construction industry? Maybe, but it's going to impact the steel industry in a great way. Those steel workers, were left on the side of the road after the China shock, and now they're back. They are Trump supporters, and when I tell you that it was magic in the arena, or it was actually at the steel plant that night, that these hardworking Americans know their jobs are secure, there's going to be capital investment, and the number of jobs is going to be grown around the country, whether it's in Pittsburgh, whether it's in Arkansas, whether it's in Alabama.
I want to ask you about this big tax bill that worked through the House is going to the Senate next. In it is an increase or suspension to the debt limit that you need delivered on by mid-July. How close of a brush with default could this be, given how massive some of the Senate changes are expected to be to the other parts of the bill?
Well, first of all, Margaret, I will say the United States of America is never going to default. That is never going to happen. That we are on the warning track, and we will never hit the wall.
You have more wiggle room if they don't deliver this by mid-July? I mean, how hard of a date is this?
We don't give out the X date because we use that to move the bill forward.
Sometimes deadlines help force action, as you know, particularly in this town, sir. That's why I'm asking. The president did say he expects pretty significant changes to this bill, though, so that affects the timing of it moving. What would you like Republican lawmakers to keep? What would you like them to alter?
Again, that's going to be the Senate's decision. Leader Thune, who I've worked closely with during this process, has been doing a fantastic job. And Margaret, I'll point out, everyone said that Speaker Johnson would not be able to get this bill out of the House with his slim majority. He got it out. Leader Thune has a bigger majority, and this is with President Trump's leadership. So
there's no red lines for you in there. I've just don't touch this. You can, tinker with that.
Well, I think that they're not necessarily my red lines. The president has his campaign promises that he wants to fulfill for working Americans. So it's no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, deductibility of auto loans for American-made automobiles.
So those have to stay in.
Those have to stay in.
JP Morgan's Diamond also predicted a debt market crisis. Cracks in the bond market was what he said. You are considering easing some regulations, you've said, for the big banks. How do you avoid that bond market crisis he's predicting spreading and really causing concern, particularly with all of the worries about American debt right now? So
again, I've known Jamie a long time, and for his entire career, he's made predictions like this. Fortunately, none of them have come true. That's why he's a banker, a great banker. He tries to look around the corner. One of the reasons I'm sitting here talking to you today and not at home watching your show is that I was concerned about the level of debt. So the deficit this year is going to be lower than the deficit last year, and in 2 years, it will be lower again. We are going to bring the deficit down slowly. We didn't get here in 1 year. We didn't get here in 1 year, and this has been a long process. So the goal is to bring it down over the next 4 years, leave the country in great shape in 2028. You
know that the Speaker of the House estimates that this is going to add $4 to $5 trillion over the next 10 years, and there's that debt limit increase.
Well, again, Margaret, that's CBO scoring.
That's the Speaker of the House.
No.
He said it last Sunday on this program.
He said that's the CBO scoring.
He said that sounds right.
Let me tell you what's not included in there, what can't be scored. So we're taking in substantial tariff income right now. So there are estimates that could be another $2 trillion. That we are pushing through savings. So my estimate is that could be up to another $100 billion a year. So over the 10-year window, that could be $1 trillion. President has a prescription drug plan with the pharmaceutical companies that could substantially push down costs for prescription drugs, and that could be another $1 trillion. So there's the 4.
Treasury Secretary Bessent will be watching closely what happens next. Face the Nation will be back in a minute, so stay with us. And we go now to Republican Senator Rand Paul, who joins us from Lexington, Kentucky this morning. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Margaret.
You just heard the Treasury Secretary say a number of things, dismiss the potential price increases that could come from the tariffs when it comes to retailers. He also played down the cost of this tax and border bill that just passed through the House. Do you agree with his math?
Well, the math doesn't really add up. One of the things this big and beautiful bill is it's a vehicle for increasing spending for the military and for the border. It's about $320 billion in new spending. To put that in perspective, that's more than all the DOGE cuts that we found so far. So the increase in spending put into this bill exceeds the DOGE cuts. When you look just at the border wall, they have $46.5 billion for the border wall. Well, their current estimate from the CBP is $6.5 million per mile. So if you did 1,000 miles, that's $6.5 billion, but they have $46 billion. So they've inflated the cost of the wall 8-fold. So there's a lot of new spending that has to be counteracted. But essentially, this is a bill by the military-industrial complex advocates who are padding the military budget. There's going to be a lot of extra money. Look, the president has essentially stopped the border flow without new money and without any new legislation. So I think they're asking for too much money. And in the end, the way you add it up to see if it actually is going to save money or add money is how much debt are they going to borrow? $5 trillion over 2 years. Enormous amount.
Right. That was the number that the secretary was quibbling over. The president has taken note of some of your skepticism, and he did tweet yesterday saying that if you, Rand Paul, vote against his massive border and tax bill, the people of Kentucky will never forgive you. Do you consider that a threat? And do you know if you have 3 other Republicans who will join you to block it from passage?
I had a very good conversation with the president this week about tariffs. He did most of the talking, and we don't agree exactly on the outcome. But when I come home to Kentucky, I talk to the Farm Bureau, which is opposed to the tariffs. I talked to the bourbon industry, which is opposed to the tariffs. I talked to the cargo companies, UPS, DHL, all of their pilots are opposed to it. I talked to the hardwood floor people. I talked to the people selling houses, building houses. I have no organized business interest in Kentucky for the tariffs. So I think it's worth the discussion, and it's worth people remembering that the Republicans used to be for lower taxes. Tariffs are a tax. So if you raise taxes on the private sector, that's not good for the private sector.
Well, you know, we hear from other senators who also get complaints from their people in their districts, but they're falling in line. Do you have 3 other Republicans who will stand with you to block this bill?
I think there are 4 of us at this point, and I would be very surprised if the bill at least is not modified in a good direction. Look, I want to vote for it. I'm for the tax cuts. I've voted for the tax cuts before. I want the tax cuts to be permanent. But at the same time, I don't want to raise the debt ceiling $5 trillion. So I've told him if you take the debt ceiling off the bill, in all likelihood, I can vote for what the agreement is on the rest of the bill, and it doesn't have to be perfect to my liking, but I can't be. If I vote for the $5 trillion debt, who's left in Washington that cares about the debt? We will have lost. But the GOP will own the debt once they vote for this.
But the leader, as you know, is sort of in a tight spot here. He needs a vehicle to raise that debt ceiling. Otherwise, you had to turn to Democrats to get that done. What was the White House response when you asked that to the president?
Well, historically, the debt ceiling's always gone up and will always go up, and I'm not proposing that it doesn't. But the people who should vote for it are the people who vote for the spending. Historically, all the Democrats vote for raising the debt ceiling, and about 15 big government Republicans vote for it. This will be the first time it's voted on just by Republicans. This will be the first time that Republicans own the debt. They already own the spending. In March, we continued, not me, but most Republicans voted to continue the Biden spending levels. So you remember the campaign, everybody's talking about Bidenomics and Biden inflation and Biden spending levels. Well, the Republicans all voted to keep the Biden spending levels, and that's why the deficit this year is going to be $2.2 trillion this year.
So you think this is bad politics for Republicans Some of your Republican colleagues like Josh Hawley are saying that changes to Medicaid are bad politics for America's working people and for your party.
I think it was a bad strategy. I think the tax cuts are good for the economy. When we passed the tax cuts in 2017, the economy grew like gangbusters. We had lowest unemployment historically. It was the great achievement of Trump's first administration. They should have been satisfied by just doing the tax part of this and not getting involved into the debt part of it.
The last time you were with us in March, you talked about conversations you had with Elon Musk. As you know, he's just left his work with the administration. You had proposed a rescission request, a clawback of about $500 billion from money Congress had already signed off on. We know now that the White House is going to ask Congress this week for some rescissions. Sounds like it's just $9.4 billion, and it's PBS, it's NPR, and it's foreign aid. Is this really the best strategy? And do you think 51 Republican senators are on board with it?
First of all, I will vote for spending cuts. The more the better. This is very, very small. To put it in perspective, if the deficit this year is $2.2 trillion, if you cut $9 billion, the deficit's going to be $2.191 trillion. It really doesn't materially change the course of the country. We should do it by all means, and it is the low-hanging fruit. This is the money that was pointed out that was being spent for sex change operations in Guatemala, trans opera in Colombia, all this crazy spending. Yes, it should be cut.
Sesame Street.
But I had an amendment about a month. Excuse me?
It's Sesame Street. It's PBS and NPR.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, you're right. We'll see if there's the votes to cut it. I don't think we necessarily need government program anymore. We have so many choices on the internet and so many choices on television. But my preference has always been in the past to cut a little bit of everything rather than cut a lot of something. So what I've done in the past is propose a penny plan budget where we cut a certain percentage of everything, but it includes entitlements or it doesn't really work. Once you exclude the entitlements, there isn't enough money to cut. So you can never achieve balance by not looking at the entitlements.
The budget director on another program this morning said they may not need to use this rescission, this clawback, because the White House has other tools. Do you think they need to go through Congress? Is this overstepping?
Well, they absolutely have to use the rescission, and it is done by simple majority, by Republicans only. There is no filibuster of it, so it's a great tool to cut spending. If they don't use it, it'll be a huge wasted opportunity. But I will tell you, they tried in the first Trump administration. It wasn't their fault. They sent a tiny one, $16 billion, and it failed because 2 Republicans went the other way. So we'll see what happens on this. But if we can't even cut welfare that we're giving to other countries, if we can't cut foreign aid, welfare, I feel bad for the country. You know, interest rates are rising. We're having trouble selling our debt. We've got a lot of problems.
Senator Rand Paul, we'll be right back. Be sure to tune in to CBS News 24/7 weekdays at 5 p.m. Eastern for our new streaming show, The Takeout, hosted by Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett, for your daily dose of politics, policy, pop culture, and more. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're joined now by FDA Commissioner Dr. Marty Makary. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to have you here in person.
Good to be here.
So I want to get through a lot here, but one of the things we've noticed is this new COVID variant that seems to be circulating in Asia. I believe it's NB 1.8.1. It's a variant under monitoring. What do we need to know?
Yeah, so this appears to be a subvariant of JN1, which has been the dominant strain. So it's believed that there is cross-immunity protection. The COVID virus is going to continue to mutate, and it's behaving like a common cold virus. It's now going to become the 5th coronavirus that's seasonal, that causes about 25% of the cases of the common cold.
So you're thinking of it as like a flu-type variant, just a normal fluctuation.
The flu mutates about 34 times more frequently than COVID. The COVID variant mutation rate appears to be a little more stable, but the international bodies that have provided some guidance on which strain to target have suggested that either JN1 or any of these subvariants would be reasonable strains to target.
So you don't seem overly concerned about that. I want to get now into some of the recommendations that have been very specific this week from the CDC and you with the HHS secretary in this video announcement on Tuesday, where Secretary Kennedy said the CDC was removing the COVID vaccine for healthy children and healthy pregnant women from its recommended immunization schedule. He then had a memo to the CDC rescinding recommendations for kids' vaccines, saying the known risks do not outweigh the benefits. Then late Thursday, the CDC said, quote, shared clinical decision making, which I think is just talking to your doctor, should determine whether kids get vaccinated. Can you clearly state what the policy is? Because this is confusing.
Yeah, we believe the recommendation should be with the patient and their doctor. So we're going to get away from these blanket recommendations in healthy young Americans because we don't want to see, well, on the COVID vaccine schedule, we don't want to see kids kicked out of school because a 12-year-old girl is not getting her 5th COVID booster shot. We don't see the data there to support a young, healthy child getting a repeat infinite annual COVID vaccine. There's a theory that we should sort of blindly approve the new COVID boosters in young, healthy kids every year in perpetuity, and a young girl born today should get 80 COVID mRNA shots or other COVID shots in her average lifespan. We're saying that's a theory, and we'd like to check in and get some randomized controlled data. It's been about 4 years since the original randomized trials. So we'd like an evidence-based approach. Dr. Prasad and I published this in the New England Journal of Medicine last week, and we're basically saying we'd like to bring some confidence back to the public around this repeat booster strategy theory, because
your statement was not about repeat boosters. It says the vaccine is not recommended for pregnant women. The vaccine is not recommended for healthy children. That's different than annual boosters.
Yeah, at this point, we're dealing, it is a booster strategy. People would be getting the updated shot. So whether or not a young, healthy
kids who haven't gotten
so
a
we'd
shot?
Like to see the data. We'd love to see that
No,
data
but on a
doesn't
practical
exist.
level, for a parent at home hearing you and trying to make sense
We're
here.
saying take it back to your doctor.
If their child has not been vaccinated, are you recommending that their first encounter with COVID be an actual infection?
We're not going to push the COVID shot in young, healthy kids without any clinical trial data supporting it. That is a decision between a parent and their doctor. And just so, I don't know if you know these statistics, but for 88% of American kids, their parents have said no to the COVID shot last season. So the vast majority of Americans are saying no. Maybe they want to see some clinical data as well. Maybe they have concerns about the safety.
I don't want to crowdsource my health guidance. I want a clear thing, right? You don't go with popularity. You go with, as you're saying, data. And when we
so let's see the data.
Okay, so the CDC data said 41% of children aged 6 months to 17 years hospitalized with COVID between 2022 and 2024 did not have a known underlying condition. In other words, they looked healthy. And COVID was serious for them.
So first of all, we know the CDC data is contaminated with a lot of false positives from incidental positive COVID tests with routine testing of every kid that walks in the hospital. When I go to the ICU, when I walk to we know that data historically under the Biden administration did not distinguish being sick from COVID or an incidental positive COVID test. When you go to an ICU in America and you ask how many people are in the ICU that are healthy that are sick with COVID, the answer I get again and again is we haven't seen that in a year or years. And so the worst thing you can do in public health is to put out an absolute universal recommendation in young, healthy kids. And the vast majority of Americans are saying, no, we want to see some data. And you say, forget about the data, just get it anyway.
Okay, so on data and transparency. For decades, since 1964, it was the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP, that went through this panel recommendation. I mean, people watched these things during COVID. The report was then handed up. It offered debate, it offered transparency, and it offered data points that people could refer back to. Why did you bypass all of this and just come down with a decision before the panel could meet and make that data?
That panel has been a kangaroo court where they just rubber stamp every single vaccine put in front of them. If you look at the minutes of The report from they even say we were generally want to move towards a risk stratified approach.
So why not let them do that in June?
So in the meantime, we don't want an absolute recommendation for healthy kids to get it. They can do it, and that committee will meet and make recommendations. But you look at the minutes of the last couple of years, they say we want a simple message for everybody just so they can understand it. It was not a data-based conversation. It was a conversation based on marketing and ease. And I've written an article titled "Why the People Don't Trust the CDC," and it's in part from that blanket
strategy. Well, you're kind of telling them not to right now. You just said don't trust the CDC.
We're saying it's going to be between a doctor and a patient until that committee meets or more experts weigh in or we get some clinical data. If there's zero clinical data, you're opining. I mean, it's a theory. And so we don't want to put out an absolute recommendation for kids with no clinical data to
So you
support
made
it.
this pronouncement as well on pregnant women. There is data. Researchers in the UK analyzed a series of 67 studies, which included 1.8 million women. And the journal BMJ Global Health published it. People can Google it at home. And it says the COVID vaccine in pregnant women is highly effective in reducing the odds of maternal SARS-CoV-2 infection, hospital admission, and improves pregnancy outcomes with no serious safety concerns. This is data that shows that it is recommended or could be advised for pregnant women to take this vaccine. Why do you find otherwise?
There's no randomized controlled trial. That's the gold standard. Those 67 studies are mixed. The data in pregnant women is different for healthy versus women with a comorbid condition. So it's a very mixed bag. So we're saying your obstetrician, your primary care doctor, and the pregnant woman should together decide whether or not to get it. 12% of pregnant women last year got the COVID shot. So people have serious concerns, and it's probably because they want to see a randomized trial data. The randomized trial in pregnant women.
The world moves on. And you published in the New England Journal of Medicine on May 20th, in that report you referenced, you listed pregnancy as an underlying medical condition that increases a person's risk for severe COVID. You said that. So then 7 days later, you joined in this video announcement saying you should drop the recommendation for the COVID vaccine in healthy pregnant women. So what changed in this 7 days?
In the New England Journal of Medicine, we simply list what the CDC has traditionally defined as high risk, and we're just saying decide with your doctor. We're not saying one way or the other. And the randomized
data
trial,
and information as well from you and your.
So here's the data on pregnant women. A randomized controlled trial was set up and it was closed without any explanation. We wanted to see that trial complete so women can have information that in a randomized controlled trial, which is the gold standard, this is what the data shows. We don't have those data.
All right. It is still unclear what pregnant women now should do until they get the data that
I'd say talk to their doctor.
When do they get the data you're promising? All these controlled studies.
In the absence of data, they should talk to their doctor, and their doctor will use their best wisdom and judgment.
FDA Commissioner, thank you for trying to help clear this up. Up next, the potential impact of those new policies regarding foreign student visas. We'll be right back. We turn now to the top Democrat on the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. That's Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy. He's in Illinois. Good morning to you. I want to get straight to it. You heard from the Secretary of State this week that the State Department is going to work with Homeland Security to aggressively revoke visas for Chinese students, including those with connections to the Chinese Communist Party or studying in critical fields. There are like 300,000 Chinese students with visas in this country. The U.S. government already has a heightened level of vetting. What's going to change?
I don't know. There's not enough details, but what it looks like is they're targeting all people of Chinese origin who are on international student visas, because he's not limiting it to just people who might have ties to the Chinese Communist Party. And if they do have those ties, they don't belong here, especially if they're committing nefarious acts. However, this appears to be much broader, and it's terribly misguided, and it appears prejudicial and discriminatory. My own father came here on an international student visa, and I believe that these people are vital for our economy and for entrepreneurship in this country, and I think this is going to harm America more than help.
You said if someone has ties to the Chinese Communist Party, they shouldn't be here. Does that mean all the students who are children of leaders? For example, Xi Jinping's own daughter shouldn't have been allowed here?
Well, if they were engaged in nefarious activities and if they are somehow deeply connected to the CCP, I think that we should be very careful. But in this particular case, they're not only going after people who might fall in that category, but it's anybody who is from China, including Hong Kong, by the way, where people are actually persecuted for various freedoms they're trying to exercise and who come here seeking to exercise those freedoms. So this is a terribly misguided policy.
The Biden administration did conduct heightened vetting, as you know, of Chinese students. Do you think that there is a legitimate argument for expanding this, that certain areas should just be off limits?
I think that you should definitely have heightened vetting, especially in certain critical areas, because we know that the CCP tries to steal, for instance, intellectual property or worse. But the way that this is currently structured looks very, very suspicious. And you have to remember that the people that are cheering for this policy, what Marco Rubio had called for, is the Chinese Communist Party. Why? Because they want these people back. They want the scientists and the entrepreneurs and the engineers who can come and help their economy. And so we are probably helping them as well as other countries more than helping ourselves with this policy.
The defense secretary is traveling in Asia right now, and he said in a defense forum speech that Beijing is, quote, concretely and credibly preparing to use military force. He said their military is rehearsing. Take a listen.
Any attempt by Communist China to conquer Taiwan by force would result in devastating consequences for the Indo-Pacific and the world. There's no reason to sugarcoat it. The threat China poses is real, and it could be imminent.
He did not say what the consequences would be. Are you encouraged by what appears to be a statement of support for allies?
I am. I think what he's saying is largely correct, but I think the problem is at the same time he says that, either Donald Trump or even him or others say other things that push away our friends, partners, and allies in the region and cause confusion. And so we need to be consistent and thoughtful with regard to our statements, and we need to be also very methodical about our actions in trying to curb military aggression by the Chinese Communist Party in the South China Sea and with regard to Taiwan.
Since you track U.S. intelligence, I wanted to ask you if you have any insight into what appears to be the swarm of Ukrainian drones that has destroyed 40 Russian military aircraft deep inside Russian territory overnight. Sources are telling our Jennifer Jacobs that the White House wasn't aware that this attack was planned. What can you tell us about the level of U.S. intelligence sharing with Ukraine right now and helping them with their targets?
I don't want to get into classified information, but what I can say is that it's a little bit more strained in light of what Donald Trump has said recently. The one thing that I can also say is that Trump was right the other day to say that Putin is crazy in the way that he's going after civilian areas in Ukraine repeatedly. And so the Ukrainians are striking back. At the end of the day, the only way that we can bring these hostilities to an end is by strengthening the hand of the Ukrainians. Trump should, at this point, realize that Putin is playing him and aid the Ukrainians in their battlefield efforts. That's the best way to get to some type of armistice or truce at the negotiating table, sooner rather than later.
All right. Congressman Krishnamurthy, thank you for your insights today. And we're turning now to the president of Wesleyan University, Michael Roth, who joins us from Monterey, Massachusetts. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
I want to pick up on something we were just discussing with the congressman, and that is this instruction to have new scrutiny of Chinese students, but also more broadly, Secretary Rubio said all U.S. embassies should not schedule any new student visa application appointments at this time. About 14% of your students are international. Are you concerned they won't be able to come back to school in September?
I'm very concerned, not only about Wesleyan, but about higher education in the United States. One of the great things about our system of education is that it attracts people from all over the world who want to come to America to learn. And while they're here learning, they learn about our country, our values, our freedoms. And this is really an act of intimidation to scare schools into towing the line of the current administration. It really has nothing to do with national security or with anti-Semitism. This heightened scrutiny is meant to instill fear on college campuses, and I'm afraid it is working.
Well, it is noticeable, sir, that, at a time when so many higher education institutions, Harvard, Columbia, Brown, have had federal funding revoked because of their policies, we find heads of universities are fearful of speaking out. Why are you not afraid of speaking critically?
Oh, I am. I'm afraid too, but I just find it extraordinary that Americans are afraid to speak out, especially people who, run colleges, universities. Why? This is a free country. I've been saying it my whole life. I used to tell my parents that when I didn't want to do something, I would say, it's a free country. And this idea that we're supposed to actually conform to the ideologies in the White House, it's not just bad for Harvard or for Wesleyan. It's bad for the whole country because journalists are being intimidated, law firms are being intimidated, churches, synagogues, and mosques will be next. We have to defend our freedoms. And when we bring international students here, what they experience is what it's like to live in a free country. And we can't let the president change the atmosphere so that people come here and are afraid to speak out.
But there are also some specific criticisms being lodged by members of the administration. Do you think that higher education has become too dependent on federal funding, for example, or money from foreign donors? Are there legitimate criticisms?
There are lots of legitimate criticisms of higher education. I don't think overdependence on federal funding is the issue. Most of the federal funding you hear the press talk about are contracts to do specific kinds of research that are really great investments for the country. However, the criticisms of colleges and universities that we have monoculture, that we don't have enough intellectual diversity, that's a criticism I've been making of my own school and of the rest of higher education for years. I think we can make improvements, but the way we make improvements is not by just lining up behind a president, whoever that happens to be. We make improvements by convincing our faculty and students to broaden our perspectives, to welcome more political and cultural views, not to line up and conform to the ideology of those in power. But yes, we have work to do to clean up our own houses, and we ought to get to it. But to do it under the gun of an aggressive authoritarian administration, that will lead to a bad outcome.
Do you define some of the protests that even Wesleyan had on its campus that were, critical of the state of Israel, for example, regarding the war against Hamas in Gaza? Do you consider them to be xenophobic by definition, anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish?
Oh, no, certainly not by definition. There are lots of examples of anti-Semitism around the country. Some of them on college campuses. They're reprehensible. When Jewish students are intimidated or afraid to practice their religion on campus or are yelled at, it's horrible. But at Wesleyan and in many schools, the percentage of Jews protesting for Palestinians was roughly the same as the percentage of Jews on the campus generally. The idea that you are attacking anti-Semitism by attacking universities, I think is a complete charade. It's just an excuse for getting the universities to conform. We need to stamp out anti-Semitism. Those two young people just murdered because they were Jewish in Washington, that's a great example of how violence breeds violence. But the attack on universities is not an attempt to defend Jews. On the contrary, I think more Jews will be hurt by these attacks than helped.
President Roth, thank you for your time this morning. We'll be back in a moment. Negotiations for a Gaza ceasefire deal continue as the desperation for humanitarian aid grows. Our Imtiaz Tayyib has the latest.
Gaza's Nasser hospital overrun with casualties after Israeli forces opened fire on Palestinians on their way to an aid distribution point in the southern city of Rafah. Health officials say at least 49 people were killed and over 200 wounded, many suffering from gunshot injuries. This man's brother was killed as he waited to collect a food parcel. This is wrong, he says. Let the whole world see this. See what the Israelis and the Americans are doing to us. They're lying to us. They say humanitarian aid, but then they kill us. Why? Palestinians say Israeli forces have repeatedly opened fire at aid distribution points run by the U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. An allegation Israel denies. GHF, which didn't exist a few months ago, is staffed with heavily armed American contractors. The UN and other aid agencies have refused to work with the group, saying it has, quote, militarized aid, which goes against all humanitarian principles, as innocent Palestinians continue to pay the ultimate price. This video is of 5-year-old Ward El-Sheikh Khalil from a week ago as she escaped the flames that engulfed the UN school her family was sheltering in. She survived, but her mother, brothers, and sisters were all killed in the Israeli strike. Asked what happened, Ward broke down. A rocket fell on them, she said, and they died.
And earlier, we spoke with Ward's uncle, Iyad, to see how she was doing. And he told us she keeps asking for her mother and that she is in serious need of psychological support, something not available to her or most children in Gaza.
Imtiaz Tayyab in Tel Aviv. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.